and the suppression of those rights. A few weeks after the shootings here, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, made a remark in referring to these shootings in which he said, and I quote, "When dissent turns to violence, it invites tragedy." When dissent turns to violence, it invites tragedy. And I would like to suggest to you today that what he actually meant to say is that when a government interferes with the free flow of ideas, when a government suppresses the rights of its citizens to speak freely and to assemble peacefully, that government invites tragedy. And when that happens, that government becomes responsible for the violence that follows. And in my opinion, that is exactly what happened here 40 years ago. But I didn't come here today to lecture you about the politics of 1970. I'm sure that before the day's over, you're going to hear a lot more on that subject than you care to, but you won't hear it from me. Instead, I came here today to talk to you a little bit about a 19-year-old girl. A sweet, intelligent, loving, warm, intelligent, compassionate, creative, funny, giving, intelligent woman. And if I didn't use the word intelligent, forgive me. I tell you that Alison Krauss was as bright as they come. And I had planned to spend a few minutes telling you a few stories about Alison when she was here as a student. She sat on this hill where you now sit. She walked on those paths where you now stand. When her laughter used to dance through the branches of these trees. But when I got here, I was told that the speaking schedule is a little bit tight and to please keep my comments brief. So I'm sorry that I'm going to have to, those stories will have to wait for another time. But what I can do and what I will do briefly is tell you what Alison would tell you if she was standing here today. And if she were here today, she would be thanking you, all of you. She would thank those of you who organized, who put in the tireless long hours to put this event together. She would thank you. She would thank those of you that are here to listen, to maybe learn, to support the event. Your presence here today makes a strong and important statement. Not just on this campus and not just in the community, but across the country. And what it says is that whether it's 4 years or 40 years or 400 years, we will not let the world forget what happened here 40 years ago. And then after thanking you, I have no doubt that she would zero in on an issue at hand, which is these ceremonies are very important. They should continue. And the speeches, as eloquent as they are, should continue. And the memorials and the markers that have been built, although long overdue, they're now here, they're appropriate, and they're greatly appreciated. However, what I hear Alison saying is that there is still a lingering issue. There's some unfinished business. The voice I hear in my ear says, Barry, remind them that as we stand here 40 years later, there are still 4 women, 4 mothers who have spent the last 40 years without their children. And to this day, nobody has stood up and been held accountable for that. Nobody. And as we stand here today, 40 years later, there's a man who's present who hasn't stood for 40 years. And to this day, nobody has taken responsibility for that. Nobody. And there are 8 other men who over 40 years have seen their physical wounds heal, but whose emotional scars will never heal. And to this day, nobody has stood up and said, "I'm sorry, it was a mistake." Nobody. And then there's William Schroeder, and Sandy Scheuer, and Jeffrey Miller, and Allison Krauss. 4 young people, 4 children whose lives were taken much, much, much too soon. Their tragic loss of life was unnecessary, it was unwarranted, and it was inexcusable. And those are not my words. Those are the words of the Department of Justice, concluding an investigation, a thorough investigation of what happened here 40 years ago. And what they say is that their tragic loss of life was unnecessary, it was unwarranted, and it was inexcusable. Yet today, 40 years later, the very men that pulled the triggers, the very men that gave the orders, and the very men that gave permission actually have been excused. And I think there's something wrong with that picture. Right. And Allison thinks that if we're going to stand here 40 years later and ask the world to remember, to never forget the tragedy that took place on May 4th, 1970, then we damn well better stand here and remind the world to never forget, and do so by reading you something that occurred since that date. 40 years is a long time. Memories fade, people move on, wounds heal. But some wounds never heal. Some wounds are never meant to heal. And this wound will not heal until somebody, somewhere, someday, stands up and takes responsibility for the blood that was spilled on this campus 40 years ago. And if any of you are uncertain as to who should be nominated for such an honor, I would like to offer